Welcome to The National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, Editor-in-Chief of thenationalpulse.com. It was almost 10 years ago to the day that a man born in Pakistan rose to national prominence in the United Kingdom, winning an historic election victory by becoming the first Muslim executive mayor in Britain's history. But despite his ostensibly respectable background as a solicitor and member of the Law Society of England, Lutfur Rahman was controversial from the start. His selection by Britain's Labour Party was mired in electoral fraud, a harbinger of what was to come. Rahman had signed up fake members of the Labour Party to vote in his candidate selection process, Britain's version of a party primary. He also had links with a known extremist group, the Islamic Forum of Europe. But despite being unselected by Britain's Labour Party, the equivalent of the Democratic Party, he stood in the 2010 election and won, in large majority due to his politicking amongst the local Bangladeshi community. That's in East London. Now he was the mayor of a jurisdiction with over $1 billion annual budget. Rahman was fawned over by the radical left and anti-Semites alike. He set about creating a strongman fiefdom for himself in one of the most impoverished areas of England. For a time, Rahman seemed unassailable. He won re-election in 2014 with a record turnout in the area, but something was amiss. I should know. I was there. In 2014, my colleague Andre Walker and I spent polling day, election day, in the United Kingdom in Tower Hamlets, intent on doing similar investigative reporting that I had seen James O'Keefe doing here in the United States. Here's a video we made from back then.
So we're here in Tower Hamlets. The returning officer here promised that there wouldn't be any intimidation of voters, nor would there be people bothering voters on the way into the ballot box. But behind us, you can see a police officer watching while exactly that's happening. And not only that, the local police officer and the presiding officer at the polling station had not been told that this wasn't allowed to happen. Moments ago, we spoke to the presiding officer and the police in this very polling station behind me. They said that there were only 2 people from each political party outside the ballot box, but we counted 2 for Tower Hamlets first. They support the mayor of Tower Hamlets, Lutfur Rahman, and the rest of them were all from the Labour Party, and we think you can count more than 2. So we've just been removed from this polling station by the presiding officer who asked us to leave the building, which of course we complied with. But there is a teller actually inside the polling station talking to voters in complete contravention of the law. We'll now wait to see how long it takes for her to be removed. So, after 10 minutes of waiting, the teller behind us in the polling station has been asked to remove her rosette, but allowed to stay inside. That's in complete contravention of the rules, and we've made this point. Unfortunately, it's fallen on deaf ears. More problems in Tower Hamlets today.
You're not supposed to be inside, are you? But you're not supposed to be inside. Take an umbrella.
But where were you? Were you inside the polling station?
Oh, no. Okay. So there's a lot of people just milling around?
Yeah, a lot of people.
So from a voter's point of view, if you were to turn up and see all these people, would you be intimidated?
Oh, I don't know.
Don't know? Yeah. But what a difference a few miles makes. We're here in the London Borough of Newham. This is the famous Upton Park, home of West Ham United Football Club. At this polling station, there's been no complaints, and there's no need for the police, and there's been no trouble in general. It seems to be better run than Tower Hamlets down the road.
Well, that was a film that I recorded back in 2014. For those unaware, there are pretty strict guidelines about who can be in or around a polling station in the United Kingdom to guard against voter intimidation. But there you saw members of the Tower Hamlets First Party and the Labour Party crowding the entrance to those polling stations. You heard me there lecturing one of the guys at the end who claimed he was only going inside because it was raining. Total rubbish. But that wasn't all that happened in Tower Hamlets on the run-up to that election. The whole thing turned into a third world farce, and eventually Lutfur Rahman was removed and banned from holding public office in the United Kingdom. In April 2015, just a few months after his re-election, our reporting helped to create a case against Rahman which showed him and his minions involved in corruption and bribery and using undue spiritual influence over voters. In other words, cajoling local Muslims to vote for him and using mosques and imams to help. The lead petitioner at the time, Andy Earlham, said outside the London courtroom, quote, "Tower Hamlets Town Hall was taken over by a bunch of gangsters, and today they have been thrown out. But this is only the tip of the iceberg, and we want a further investigation into the rest of the corruption." He got one. Even the judge, Richard Morey, said of Lutfur Rahman, "It is guaranteed Mr. Rahman will denounce this judgment as racist and Islamophobic. It's nothing of the sort. The natural sense of solidarity of the Bangladeshi community has been subverted," end quote. That community had been told by Rahman's henchmen that it was their Islamic duty to vote for him. And a report by then government minister Eric Pickles pointed to abuses of postal voting and evidence of pressure being put on vulnerable members of ethnic minority communities, particularly women and young people. Is this starting to sound familiar? It should, unfortunately. 20 years on from when Britain first introduced mass mail-in voting, and half a decade since one of the most outrageous electoral fraud cases the Western world has ever seen, the United States of America is seeing the same third world politicking on its shores. Meanwhile, the left claims, voter fraud never happens, they're lying. They're the liars. Which makes what James O'Keefe and Project Veritas do even more important. Because we can no longer rely on the left to be good faith actors. Just like Judge Morey and Eric Pickles in the UK said, the left will now try to hide their latest voting fraud schemes by screaming Islamophobia and racist. In fact, it is the proponents of such things who are the racists, happy to exploit their own communities for a tiny sniff of power. And this time it isn't Lutfur Rahman implicated. It's organisers and supporters of Ilhan Omar. We'll be speaking with Matthew Tyrman from Project Veritas later on in this show and showing you precisely what James O'Keefe, Tyrman and their team have uncovered and what it portends for the election on November the 3rd. And while all this is going on, while Joe Biden is calling campaign lids at 9 a.m., the Trump administration is actually still running the country and doing a lot of things that most media organizations simply won't report. My next guest is one of the best-known national security reporters in town and one of my favorite drinking buddies. Adam Credo has the scoop on the latest from the US government taking the fight to the Chinese Communist Party on the international stage. Stay tuned for that. This is the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, live from downtown in Washington, D.C., joined in studio by Adam Credo, senior reporter at the Washington Free Beacon, covering foreign policy and national security. Adam, thank you so much for joining us here in studio.
Thanks for having me.
You can't say things.
Yeah,
the point of an interview is that we interact. Adam, we've known each other for a very long time. I've followed your work very closely, but none so important right now as your State Department and DOJ and broader Trump administration reporting about how this government is assailing the Chinese Communist Party, both in domestic institutions, through things that we know are taking place here in the United States, whether it's TikTok, and we can get into that in just a second. But specifically, you had a story that came out this weekend, which I thought people really need to know about. And goodness knows that these aren't the stories leading the New York Times or the Washington Post anymore. They're more concerned that, the president paid his taxes that he was supposed to pay, but that it wasn't as much as they wanted him to pay. All right, whatever. Let's talk about the UN and what, because a lot of people think the UN, and I'm one of them, by the way, should be something that actually Western nations can kind of turn their backs on now and go, you know what, you don't stand for any of the same things we stand for, you don't stand for your founding principles, you don't actually pay any attention to the people who fund you, you're always doing the bidding for the countries that don't fund you, but that want to attack the US, the UK, Israel, the Brexit movement, the greater deplorables, etc. But one step sort of back from fully leaving and turning our backs on the UN is actually to take the fight to these countries at the UN.
That's right.
And that's what I understand the US is currently doing as it pertains to the CCP. So explain this to us.
Yeah, you're right. And I think it's noteworthy in that it's not one of the sexiest stories out there, right? So it's not going to adorn the front page of the New York Times, but it's important nevertheless. While a lot of ink has been spilled on Trump leaving United Nations organizations like the Human Rights Council, which is led by notorious human rights abusers, they haven't actually taken a look at what Trump is doing behind the scenes. And it's been a years-long effort. So according to some of the State Department and other diplomats that I've spoken to, this has been a procedural effort, but an important one. And the way they do this is by, one, recognizing the problem. What is that? China has spent years, great resources, and capital gaining clout at the UN. They control multiple UN organizations. They're the only ones, by the way, who do that, who actually have control of multiple bodies. And the outcome of that has been pretty clear in recent years. I think the most glaring example is the WHO, the World Health Organization. What happened there? China was able to infiltrate that body and essentially convince them to help it mislead the world about the coronavirus pandemic. And that's just what the WHO did at China's insistence. So the U.S. has recognized this, the Trump administration in particular, and they've begun to fight back. What does that mean? Enlisting allied nations, partners, some you might not even think about, developing countries in Africa who can actually join a lot of these international bodies that the U.S. might not be able to get on otherwise. And from there, they can promote not just a pro-Western agenda, but hopefully push back against what the communist regime is doing. And look, this is going to take time. The Chinese spent a lot of time doing this while the U.S. wasn't really paying attention. The Obama administration certainly wasn't paying attention. Their efforts at the UN was usually joined in the anti-Israel chorus of nations. So it really took the Trump administration, and particularly Secretary Pompeo at the State Department, to say, wait a minute, this is a problem. We're not winning internationally. Yeah, we can pull out of these organizations, but what's the long-term damage from that? So I think recognizing that and saying, well, we do have to participate, and this is how we do it, by pushing back against that communist propaganda.
Sort of one of those situations where for so long the United Nations guffawed at the idea of the US leaving, and now they're kind of causing so much trouble for these institutions that have become either taken over by the Chinese Communist Party or have lost their original mission, from how they behave now, that the UN would probably actually like the United States to leave at this point. It reminds me very much of how the European Union acted with the United Kingdom towards the end of our membership of that, as actually, by all means leave, because you're only actually causing us more problems. You're only causing us problems, in the sense that we can't take these big deals from these, horrible human rights abusers that seem to steer now a lot of the business of the UN of the European Union and all of that. I want to talk to you more about that when we come back from the next break. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you to everybody who over the course of this weekend went to the RussiaLie.com. We have a new ebook out there written by my lawyer friend Thomas Farnan. It's done very well over the course of the weekend. If you really want to understand the tricks that the establishment are going to use over the course of the next couple of months and indeed years, you first have to understand the tricks they used over the last 3 and 4 years. The RussiaLie.com, you can go there. It's 5 of your finest American dollars, and you get this fantastic ebook from Thomas Farnan. It walks you through exactly what took place. And Thomas is one of the only guys out there saying what I think we should all be saying right now. Actually, when you look back at all of the evidence, it's not clear that Russia did anything at all, and it was all a concoction of the globalists. We'll be back with more National Pulse in just a moment. Welcome back to the National Pulse, broadcasting live from downtown in Washington, D.C. on Monday, September the 28th, the year of our Lord 2020. My guest in studio is Adam Credo. He's a senior reporter at the Washington Free Beacon and focuses on national security and foreign policy. He's actually one of the best in the business, which is why we're so grateful to have you here in studio. Adam, you're a busy man. I know you're a busy man. You've got a cat to feed and all that. But I want to get back to the United Nations and what the Trump administration is doing. And it really isn't just the United Nations. You mentioned the WHO at the beginning. You actually mentioned, the president had a rally over the course of this weekend where he went through all of these different, either institutionally or deals that had been done under the Obama administration, that he's, you know how the president is, he's just like, that one was a beauty, we got rid of that. This other one was a beauty, we got rid of that. But he was right. You look at the Iran deal, for instance, which I know you were a massive part of the reporting on what was taking place vis-a-vis the Iran deal. So I want to ask you, as more of a point of analysis rather than reporting here, is there that much of a difference between this administration and the last administration as it pertains to foreign policy? Because people like me, and I think people who watch this show, think there is a massive, massive, gaping wide chasm. And I just want to understand from sort of reporters on the ground in DC if that level of distinction is the same, or if you just feel like it's more tinkering around the edges here.
Well, look, there's a combination of both. I think you could say at the State Department, where I spend a great deal of time and spend time particularly with the reporters who cover that beat. These are seasoned professionals who, like me, have been doing it for decades. And I think it's palpable with them. They can see the shift, right? And they're reflecting it in their reporting, whether it's biased or not, but they're sensing it for sure. And I think Secretary Pompeo and his relationship with Trump is a big portion of that. Those two are very close and I think very simpatico. The Iran deal is a great example. What are the Iranians saying now? They want Biden to win, and they're trying to do this through a combination of hacks, through a combination of social media campaigns, many of them false. Facebook and Twitter in recent months have kicked off a cadre of accounts that they identified as Iranian influence operations. So there's a reason they're looking for a Biden presidency. For the Iranians, that's more access to cash relief. The Trump administration cut that off. You talk about the UN. What did Trump do at the UN? He invoked a mechanism called snapback. That is the reimplication of all international sanctions on Iran that were lifted as part of the Obama nuclear deal. The Trump administration snapped all of those back. So you can bet your bottom dollar that the Iranians want that to go away, and they're betting on a Biden administration, which has said we'll re-enter the deal to do this. And that's, I think, very kind of emblematic, symbolic in many ways of what the rest of the international community believes. The Europeans, your friends even in the United Kingdom, are quite outraged with the Trump administration for invoking snapback and walking out of that Iranian nuclear deal.
I think some people are relieved, though, quietly, actually, that they don't have to do the heavy lifting diplomatically here.
There's a great anecdote, and I did hear this from sources at the State Department, and I think that they've even said it on the record in some forums, and that's that when the Trump administration was at the UN saying, look, we're not going to take this from the Iranians anymore, we're going back with all the international sanctions, they're cheating on the Iran nuclear deal, they're enriching uranium, they continue to build the components for an atomic weapon, they are cheating on the deal, it's within our purview to invoke snapback. Privately, France, Britain, Germany all said we share those concerns. Publicly, they want to continue doing business with Iran and they want to appease the Iranian regime. That's the key point here. But privately, they're very happy because what is Iran doing with this? They're not just killing Americans, they're killing Europeans, and they're conducting terror attacks all across the region, from Lebanon to Syria to Yemen to Iraq. That impacts Europe as well.
I want to get your view on something. You mentioned that Iran wants Biden to win. Of course, that makes perfect sense. The Chinese Communist Party also are putting a lot of efforts into getting Biden reelected. And I want to show you something, Adam, get your thoughts on this. Now, unfortunately, the viewers won't be able to see this because I just pulled this up on my screen, but I'll describe it for you. It's a cartoon that was published by Xinhua News Agency yesterday, I believe it was, yesterday morning, about 5 a.m. And the strapline says, statistics show time and time again that some are disproportionately prejudiced against in the US. Hashtag fight racism. And the cartoon that the Xinhua News Agency has put out is three white police officers. I think you can see that on my screen there. Three white police officers with a torch of the Statue of Liberty there, chasing a black man, and the title reads, "Hunt That Blackie." All right? Now that's still up on Twitter, given the fact that it's clearly racially prejudiced in and of itself. You would think that it might be taken down. But it's also foreign intervention in an election, the likes of which we were told time and time again that Russia did. Now, whatever your view is, however much the Russians were involved or not involved, or whatever your view is on that, shouldn't the same rules apply here? What is Twitter doing?
They're not. They're not applied evenly. That's the first point. The other thing is this is a hallmark of foreign influence operations, whether it be the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians. This is exactly how they influence elections. It's by sowing chaos, sowing divide amongst Americans. They know that we are divided as a country right now, and this is exactly how they're going to deepen that schism. The Chinese, again, do this. The Iranians do it in similar ways. I think differ slightly in terms of the rhetoric, but it's the same principle, it's the same idea. And with Twitter and big tech, whether it be Facebook or any of the other ones, the policy is not enforced similarly across the board. A conservative commentator posts a picture like that, they're immediately shut down. Notably, the Ayatollah has a Twitter account. His chief propagandist, Javad Zarif, the foreign minister, has a Twitter account. Ordinary Iranians can't use Twitter that way. The same thing goes for Facebook. So you do see big tech's enforcement being a problem. But there's one other thing I would note. It's kind of in the weeds, but it shows you that these companies are starting to pay attention. Zoom, the platform for meetings, were supposed to...
Can you hang on that thought?
Yes.
And we'll talk about it after the break.
Let's do it.
Because I want to make sure we have enough time to get to that. We've only got about 20 seconds here before we go to a break. Adam Credo is my guest in studio today. Matthew Tierman will be joining us shortly after the break to talk about this Project Veritas scoop. And I can tell you there are a lot more to come as well. Stick around for that. In the meantime, in the break, make sure you head on over to thenationalpulse.com/support, because we rely on you to keep watching the watchers. We'll be right back after this short break. Well, Adam Credo's got to be very, very grateful, because it's not often that I allow a guest to lead into another segment here on this show, but Adam was making such a good point. I wanted to make sure we had time. Welcome back to the National Pulse. Adam Credo in studio, my guest. You began by making a point about how some of the backlash is moving some of these companies. Talk to us.
Yeah, it was a small event, but very important in context of what's happening with big tech and the censorship of ideas and these types of things. So the Zoom meeting platform was just recently supposed to host an avowed Palestinian terrorist. That, of course, is a problem for a number of reasons. Not least of all, it violates U.S. sanctions. So the DOJ was petitioned, the Department of Justice, the Trump administration was petitioned, and I suspect strongly that Zoom got a call because that was canceled. What does this mean? Big tech, Zoom, Facebook, all of them are waking up to the fact that what they're doing on the right by censoring voices is now actually coming to bear in terms of the left. You can't host terrorists. You can't provide material support for terrorists. This, I think, is where the rubber really meets the road on those issues.
Well, Adam, just tell our audience where they can follow you and get more of your work.
Absolutely. freebeacon.com, FREEBEACON, and on Twitter, Credo, KREDO, the number 0.
Credo Zero.
Credo Zero.
Credo Zero on Twitter. I'll make sure that we share all of this after the show with you all as well. Make sure you're following Adam for the best national security and foreign policy reporting out there. And now from the sublime to the not so sublime, my friend Matthew Tierman joins us down the line. Matthew is a board member of Project Veritas and has just done amazing work in bringing this latest Project Veritas scoop out with another friend of mine, James O'Keefe. In fact, a great inspiration of mine. Matthew, I was hoping to have James on, but we'll settle for you instead. We're always grateful for your time. Look, you guys have done just such amazing reporting in the last day or so. I mean, for years and years you've done great reporting, but in the last day or so specifically, I think you and I spoke last night and you said, look, this is one of the biggest things we've ever done. I agree. Could you talk us through a little bit from the basics? Imagine this audience has never heard or seen any of this before. What the latest Project Veritas exclusive reveals.
Sure. Always a pleasure, sort of, to be with you, Raheem. Project Veritas is a nonprofit 501c3 and sister organization 501c4 that does undercover journalism. So where the mainstream media has too often abrogated their responsibility to hold the powers that be accountable, Project Veritas has done what it can to fill the gap. And there's been many great stories. James O'Keefe obviously is very well known for the famous Acorn takedown, which put him onto the scene, working with Breitbart and Andrew Breitbart himself, and with Breitbart, the platform, about 10 years ago. Since then, there's been hundreds of videos. In 2016, Democracy Partners showing voter fraud. Bob Creamer, who was a closely tied organizer to Obama in Chicago and married to a Democratic Congresswoman, Jan Schakowsky, they were involved in voter fraud. They had in their umbrella groups a group busing people in from Chicago to Wisconsin and talking on tape saying, we'll be busing them in. We've been doing it for years. We'll be doing it for many more years. And that was a big deal in 2016. And it also showed that they were funding homeless people and mentally ill people to start fights at Trump rallies. If you remember in 2016, the media said Trump is a catalyst for violence. Well, that's because Democratic operatives were paying people to start fights. So that was a big hit. And I think, honestly, this one in Minnesota is maybe the most impactful work that Project Veritas has ever done. We exposed what many of us have known, that there is organized voter fraud. It's systemic in the big cities, in the urban machines, and there is no bigger political machine.
But Matt, we were told, and we keep getting told, and the fact checkers and the PolitiFacts and the lead stories and the Facebook fact checkers and the New York Times and the Wolf Blitzers, they all tell us there is no mass voter fraud in the United States. What say you?
Well, it always cuts one way, doesn't it? Those who deny it, and they also generally attack the messenger when it is highlighted, they have a political agenda. I mean, this is not news to any of your viewers. They're watching America's Voice, Raheem Kassam, because they have a recognition that something's rotten in the state of Denmark, to paraphrase Shakespeare. It's not a healthy system. The Fourth Estate does not go after the frauds. It covers up and works hand in glove and is complicit with them. And this Minnesota expose really shows you the smoking gun, and there's more coming. What we saw was Ilhan Omar, her family, her clan, so to speak, in the Somali and East African community in Minneapolis, which is a capital of that diaspora, is involved in organized going and harvesting mass ballots when Minnesota law has said that if you do ballot harvest, and there is a legal dispensation, you can harvest, i.e. bring 3 people's ballots to the polls and submit them on behalf of, say, somebody who's old who can't make it to the polls. But now what we see is footage of hundreds of ballots sitting on a dashboard, sitting in a car seat, and these operatives bragging about it into Snapchat. And so that's a smoking gun. And the question is there money exchanging hands?
Matt, we're going to play the clip when we come back from the break. But before we go to a break, I want to ask you this question, and you kind of alluded to it there. And we'll get into the details after we watch the video with you. But let me ask you this. Is there any more coming? Because a lot of people out there are looking at this and thinking, okay, this is some damning evidence of what's taking place. And I would pare back a little bit from what you said about the Somali and East African community. In a lot of these cases, I explained in my monologue as well, it's members of those communities who are actually exploiting those communities and the trust and the familial thing. So we don't want to lump everyone in together, but we want to say, yeah, they are being taken advantage by people from their own communities, right? So Matt, just with the 45 seconds we've got left before the break, is there more coming? Can you give us a clue?
Yes, there is. We may be airing it tonight. We may be airing it tomorrow morning, but we do have more coming, more smoking guns, more context that shows you how endemic this is and how brazen the law breaking is, that everything the mainstream media, Washington Post, New York Times says doesn't exist is a vast right-wing conspiracy. Well, the footage doesn't lie, even if the media handmaidens do.
Okay, fine. All right, hang on there, Matthew Tierman. We've got a quick break to go to here. When we come back for the audience, we're going to be playing what Project Veritas unveiled last night, Sunday night. We'll ask Matt why on a Sunday night as well. But also ask Matthew Tierman why places like Fox News and the Drudge Report aren't linking to the latest Project Veritas scoop. We'll be back with more National Pulse in just a second. Welcome back to the National Pulse. In just a moment, Natalie Winters will be joining us to walk us through some of her latest scoops on thenationalpulse.com. But I'm joined now by Matthew Tierman, board member of Project Veritas, which dropped this extraordinary video last night showing a lot of what I discussed in the monologue that happened in the United Kingdom 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's now here in the United States. Remember, I wrote a book in 2017 saying Sharia law is coming to a neighborhood near you, and I walked you through a lot of what takes place in these communities, these minority communities, predominantly related to how those communities are actually taken advantage of by some power hungry in their midst. So the question for Matthew Tierman is Ilhan Omar one of those power hungry people willing to do anything to win her election? Matthew, is this directly related to the Congresswoman?
Oh, absolutely. The two main figures that we have in this video where everything gets organized and filtered through is this Liban Mohammed and this Ali Ghani. And Ali Ghani is her deputy chief of staff in her district congressional office. That's a very high-ranking figure. That's not a foot soldier. And he was, during the campaign, he was the head of the organizer and the outreach. So that's a very high-level campaign position. So this is a guy who's actually putting the foot soldiers into the field, who's going into the projects, as the video displayed, and going to the elderly, many have just gotten to Minneapolis. Minneapolis was a major area of Somali refugee resettlement under Obama. It was very concentrated in that area. There was a whole neighborhoods that were brought up, whole housing projects dedicated to this one ethnic group. And they are being taken advantage of. They're coming from a military dictatorship, and they don't understand the free election system. And those who are supposed to be helping them and who claim to be helping them are coming to take their vote and saying, you here, we take a picture of your ID, you sign this, and we'll take care of it. And that's this mass harvesting they're doing. And that is brazenly illegal. It's obviously
just
immoral.
Incredibly familiar. It's incredibly familiar. Matt, I want to roll the video and then get your take on why the mainstream media is ignoring this. Let's roll the clip.
James O'Keefe here in downtown Minneapolis at the scene of the crime. The person you're about to meet, Liban Mohammed, aka King Liban 1, boasts about the hundreds of absentee ballots in his car.
Numbers don't lie. Wajeda gaarigaygu waa buuxaa. Waxaas waa absent ballot salka yaala. Soo ma jeedin. Fiiri, waxaas oo dhan soo ma jeedin. Waa buuxaa gaarigayga. Waa buuxa yaala. Waxaas kullu waa Jamaal Cusmaan way. Fiiri. 300 clear maanta soo dhacday oo Jamaal Cusmaan. Yeah.
There was video. You can see the video. There was a video out and about that he has the ballots in his car.
Right.
And talking about the only way you can win is with money. I was looking at them and they were not filled. They were blank.
Who is the one filling out the absentee ballots?
People who work with, like Han Omar.
Where do they pay the money?
The minute we sign the thing, the election, that's what you get paid.
Money is everything. Money is the key in this world. If you ain't got money, you should not be here, period.
Marka odayaasha waa loo codsadaa. Waana laga qaadaa.
At the end of this street,
yes,
there's 3 towers called Horn Towers.
Okay.
And it's all seniors, and they took every ballot.
Every ballot. They just take them from them.
Every single ballot. They knock on the door and say, your ballots come, give it to me, give it to me.
They don't even pay them for it. They just take it.
No. And the ones that didn't vote on ballots, the young people and the women and stuff, they were paying cash. They were getting bags of money the last 1 week here to drive people. So there's a vested interest, but we are victims of the system. They don't give a shit about any Somali.
2 in the morning, still hustling.
Capability of for the China virus, and as you know, it's already setting records like nobody's ever seen before. Last week we crossed a historic milestone when the United States conducted our 100 millionth test, far more than any other country, and not even close, actually. Second seems to be India, with 1.5 billion people, and the numbers would be probably at least 50 million more tests by us. We've conducted more tests than the entire European Union and more than all of Latin America combined. We're thrilled to be joined by Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar, Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, hi Betsy, Administrator for the Centers for Medicine and Medicaid Services Seema Verma, and Admiral Jawar, who's done such an incredible job. Thank you, Admiral. We're also joined by Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves, had a tremendous victory. We're so proud of you. And as well by Abbott CEO Robert Ford. Robert, thank you very much. Great job. Today I'm pleased to report that we're announcing our plan to distribute 150 million Abbott rapid point-of-care tests in the coming weeks, very, very soon. This will be more than double the number of tests already performed. And here's our plan. 50 million tests will go to protect the most vulnerable communities, which we've always promised to do. including 18 million for nursing homes, 15 million for assisted living facilities.
And good, Matt, but as you well know, the Sean Hannity show is an opinion show and not a news show. Why is Fox News not covering this?
Well, as I am not in the Fox News C-suite, I would only be engaged in conjecture, but I would...
it's not like you.
Yeah, I know, I'm not very opinionated, but I put forward that the next generation of Murdochs are not, the old man who was as an establishment media mogul as he was a bona fide conservative right-winger. The Sons are Upper East Side and Upper West Side New York City elite, and they're no fan of Trump. They're no fan of Project Veritas. They are much closer to the Bezos Post and the Sulzberger Times than they are the original driver of Fox News' success. Thankfully, the personalities still in Fox News and opinion are doing a good job, like Tucker, like Sean.
Yep, well, and more power to their elbow, but I just wonder whether or not their elbows are going to be swiftly removed from the airwaves after November the 3rd. Matthew, just tell our audience where they can find more from you.
ProjectVeritas.com, Project Veritas Twitter, James O'Keefe's Twitter. He might be the highest followed individual in the political debate without a blue check mark. They wouldn't validate him and verify him because that would be
Listen,
that would undermine their
It's a badge of honor. I've got a blue check mark. It's not all it's cracked up to be. Matthew Tillman, we've got to have you back. We're pushed for time here, but Matthew, thank you so much for joining us here on The National Pulse. We did have the story up last night. You can check it out at thenationalpulse.com. See you in a second. Welcome back to the National Pulse, and I'm just repeatedly told that it wouldn't be a show without Natalie Winters, so we have to bring Natalie Winters in. Natalie, fan favorite, so what are we going to do? No, you've got great scoops on the site, and I just thought we have to get to these stories. So the big two that stand out this weekend is, number one, the Joe Biden Foundation. What has the Joe Biden Foundation been up to the last couple of years?
Exactly. So the narrative tends to be that the far left wings of the Democratic Party are pushing Joe Biden to adopt radical positions on a host of issues, as Joe Biden typically tends to represent the globalist old guard. But apparently the Biden Foundation, a couple years ago in 2018, launched what was called the As You Are campaign. And this initiative, which tracked acceptance stories for LGBTQ members across the country, promoted includes some pretty outlandish stories. I think the story speaks for itself, so I'll read a couple quotes. Directly promoted by the Biden Foundation. Quote, "My youngest child is 6 and has been gender non-conforming since being able to articulate at 18 months old." Another one, quote, "My youngest child is a fabulous gender non-conforming boy who loves ballet and the RuPaul Drag Race show. At age 7, he's a powerful advocate for himself and other children just like him." It goes on to chronicle parents who feel regret over not allowing their kids, often in middle school, in some cases elementary school, to not transition earlier.
Hang on. So can we be very clear? The Biden Foundation was promoting transgenderism for babies of 18 months old.
Exactly. They had a map. Now the website is down because the foundation ceased operations in light of his presidential campaign. But when the site was active, they had a map, and you could click on all these different pins, all the way from Los Angeles to New York, obviously centered on the coasts. But you could see these crazy stories, and I only have access to the ones that are from Florida because a certain outlet over there picked up the story. But from there, I think we had 8 quotes that had children that were definitely in the minor category who were either transgender, gender nonconforming, you name it.
Don't you think that, I mean, look, Joe Biden is calling a lot of early morning lids at the moment on his campaign activity because he is obviously taking that time to prepare for the debate. Now, the debate will be assisted by the New York Times going, oh, you know, Trump should have paid X more amount in taxes, etc., etc. I mean, just the most nonsensical story that dropped yesterday, 10,000 words. If I was a reporter, I would have been embarrassed by finding nothing over the course of 10,000 words. You know, this is the old phrase, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That is what the New York Times is nowadays. But it's clear what the attack lines for Joe Biden are going to be. It's going to be coronavirus pandemic, where's your tax returns, mate? You know, all that kind of thing. Do you think that bringing up something like this from the Biden Foundation could be an ace up Trump's sleeve? Because the country is pretty much united on this, that actually we're anti-pedophilia, we're anti-sexualizing kids, we're anti-introducing children to transgenderism when they're babies, if at all ever. Don't you think that this is something that should come up in the debate?
Exactly. You'd be hard-pressed to find an American, except for that one parent listed on the Biden Foundation who thinks any 18-month-old would be in their right mind to declare themselves transgender. So there's a host of issues that I think President Trump can bring up. He has up his sleeve, whereas, as you've said, we know the Biden playbook. We know what they're going to ask, because he'll get his talking points directly from the mainstream media, who've really effectively been doing comms for that campaign since day one.
Yeah, I mean, Biden can call a lid every morning because the media will continue to campaign for him as the day goes on. And Trump has to campaign against the media as well as against the Biden campaign and all of the other organizations, institutions globally and domestically that exist to do that. I want to get into this last story with you before we have to go. Mark Elias is listed on this document by Third Way, this group Third Way, which calls itself, it's open about who they are, left-wing, hardline progressive entity, but who are pushing this narrative that the president is going to somehow cling on to the podium in the press room, in the press briefing room, and say, oh, I'm not leaving office no matter if I lose. The Third Way is sowing division, just like the Chinese Communist Party, just like the Transition Integrity Project, and all these other organizations that really, really want to sow the seeds of a civil war in this country. But the Third Way gave away one of the little tricks that the Democrats are using, and that comes in the shape of Mark Elias.
Exactly. So this is an individual who's been a mainstay in Democratic politics. He served as counsel for the Hillary Clinton campaign, the Kamala Harris campaign for a little bit before it flamed out. But interestingly enough, he, as you said, he sowed division and chaos in terms of the election, in the sense that he's fear-mongered about President Trump attempting to suppress the vote, which, again, we know that that narrative comes directly from the Transition Integrity Project. It's all aimed so come Election Day, they can have their electoral commission and really influence the election post-November 3rd. But interestingly enough, Mark Elias, who runs Democracy Docket, which is an organization that's been hailed by outlets across mainstream media, Democratic politicians, the Transition Integrity Project, to preserve the integrity of our upcoming election. Well, he actually, quote, convinced the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016 to take foreign money from individuals who were registered.
You're using their words when you say he convinced them.
Yeah, in the words of Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, Mark Elias was the individual who, quote, convinced them, made a, quote, convincing case to take money from individuals who had registered with the Foreign Agent Registration Act.
Just let's be clear, the Foreign Agent Registration Act is for people who are lobbying on behalf of foreign governments, and Mark Elias wanted the Hillary Clinton campaign to take money from people who have an interest in another foreign government's work, activities, promotion.
Some of the firms which were listed in this email thread, which it's worth a read, it's up on the National Pulse, they're huge firms that have represented governments like the Chinese Communist Party, like Iran, like even Russia, a host of different countries which have, definitely the Chinese Communist Party, meddled in our election, have an intent to. So it's definitely concerning in that respect. And again, it goes back to what we say here, we watch the watchers. And this story really is that mantra embodied, because the mainstream media will never tell you that the man who's allegedly preserving the integrity of our election is telling the Hillary Clinton campaign that they'd be missing out on a lot of cash if they wouldn't take money from people who've registered to lobby on behalf of, say, the Chinese embassy.
Natalie Winters, thank you so much for being here in studio with us, walking us through those stories. It's the lead story on thenationalpulse.com right now. I want each and every single one of you watching this program to go over there, share it, like it, email it, do whatever you want, print it, flyer it around your neighborhoods, whatever. We just need as big an audience on these stories as humanly possible, and you guys out there are our street team, and we're very grateful for it. Make sure you're heading over to thenationalpulse.com/support and support our work. Fundrealnews.com. We'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m.